Tonight we'll do probably a lot of anatomy, a lot of physiology, and then we'll get into what the real problem is with heart disease. I think some of you may be surprised at actually what the actual problem is and why most people have heart disease. So starting out with, when we talk about cardiovascular system, when we're talking about the main cardiovascular system, we're looking at the heart, and we're also looking at the arteries and the vessels. So anytime somebody says, oh, you have a primary cardiovascular issue, this is what they mean. And so we'll talk about each one of those sections here in a second. When we see the secondary cardiovascular system, we're talking about the lymphatic system, we're talking about the kidneys, we're talking about the lungs and the liver. They're all tied together, and I'll explain how in a little bit. So, important thing to know, cardiovascular deaths across the country, basically 20% of everybody that dies in the United States right now is dying from a primary cardiovascular disease. So this means either a vessel issue or a heart issue. In Park County, it's actually a little higher, 21, 26. These numbers are from 2022. They have varied a little bit as I went back and tried to read it. These are the ones that are put in concrete now. As you get 23, they're still trying to manipulate them. 24, they're still trying to manipulate them. But I will say they're still close to what these are. Deaths due to combined, when you look down through here, you see heart disease, strokes, lower respiratory issues, diabetes. All these lead to your heart stopping, and they are a secondary cardiovascular issue. In the U.S., this makes up 35% of everybody that's going to die is due to this. In Park County, there's going to be 122 people this year die from combined issues, and there's going to be 1 out of every 248 people. So if you know 500 people, 2 are going to die this year from a heart-related problem. So that's pretty significant when you start thinking about, yeah, I probably know 1,000, 2,000 people. So we're going to have 4 people die this year that I know from this. So kind of interesting. So we're going to start out with the heart. Basically, how does the heart function? And I'm going to go through each one of these things. But first of all, you have a nerve conduction, and that's basically your nerve comes to the heart and says, okay, time to beat faster or beat slower. Then you get an electrical impulse, and believe it or not, the heart can beat without a nerve going to it. So when you get a heart replacement, the heart beats on its own. It actually has its own pacemaker inside of it. Once it gets that little electric signal, it basically shocks it. The heart then, the muscles contract. And I'm going to go into each one of those steps in a little bit. Then basically it generates blood flow. It also creates a vortex, which is important. I'll tell you why in a little while. And then it controls pressure, and it also generates heat. So those are all very significant things the heart does. And believe it or not, the human heart actually beats longer than other animal hearts and any other heart on earth. For the size of the heart and for as much as it's used, it actually has the best warranty on it of anything out there. So a very good heart that we've been given. So when we talk about nerve stimulation, we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. This is everything that your body does automatically. From your heart beating to your eyes blinking to your breathing, all those things are done automatically, and that's done by your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system has 2 parts to it. It has the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. It's what you do when you get excited and you got to run from the tiger and the rattlesnake. That's the one that basically releases norepinephrine and speeds up the heart. And so it kind of governs, it's kind of the governor of the heart. Parasympathetic is just the opposite. Your rest, digest, and heal. So parasympathetics are the one that calms you down, lets you go to sleep at night. And so basically when you wake up in the morning time, sympathetics are supposed to go up, makes your heart beat faster, wakes you up, gets you out of bed. As the day goes on, your sympathetics go down and your parasympathetics come up and say, okay, time to go to sleep, time to heal your body, and that's what happens. So this is kind of in the background, regulating your main heartbeat, up and down, faster, slower, depending on what's going on. The electrical system. And I'm going to jump off this picture to the next one. This is in your writing there. This tells you exactly what's going on in the electrical system. But this picture probably is a better way to explain it. Your SA node is your own pacemaker. It's in your heart, and basically it has a rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. It sends out a signal as a rhythm. The nervous system comes in, plugs into it, and it can speed it up or slow it down. So that's where your sympathetics or your parasympathetics touch into it and make a difference. Your SA node sends out a signal, and the top of the heart, these 2 chambers are called the atrium. And basically the atrium is where blood comes into the heart. And then basically we have the AV node. This pulse goes through, flexes those, and it hits the AV node at the end of that flex. And the AV node then goes in to the Purkinje fibers. And they're kind of long fibers. They take a little time for the electrical current to get all the way down and around. And the reason is it takes time for this to relax and for the bottom to fill up with blood. And so you don't want it to go boom and the whole heart flex because you couldn't pump that way. So you have to basically let the blood come in the top because it relaxed. It squeezes down when the SA node fires. The SA node sends a signal all the way out, and at the bottom of the SA node, it hits the AV node, sends a signal down the Purkinje fibers around the bottom of the ventricle, and then it flexes the bottom and pumps out the blood. So it's actually a very good rhythm. One of the things that happens here is you can get signals that get messed up here, and you can have an arrhythmia. You can have extra little nodes that come off the side of this, and they can misfire that. And so I'll get more into why that's a problem and what happens with that. On an EKG, I don't want to spend a lot of time on an EKG, but the way the EKG works is that electrical impulse at each place in the heart sends out a little different signal. So when you send out that signal and you read it, that's what you get as an EKG. So basically, as you read through here, it'll tell you this is happening during the SA node, this is happening here, but there's a great picture that goes with it. I'll get to it. This is the second half, the PR wave and that. But this photo tells you exactly what's going on your EKG. So the P wave is happening right at the end of whenever the atrium is basically resting, and then when it flexes. That's the point between the two when that happens. When you get to the Q wave, basically that signal hit the AV node and is going to the ventricles at that point. And then basically your ventricles at the R wave is when the ventricle starts to fire, and the S wave is when it calms down again, and we go through that cycle. So when doctors look at your EKG, they can tell what's going on with your electrical system in each part of it. So they can say, yeah, this was an AV issue, this was a stenoidal node, this was also the Purkinje fiber. They can tell the timing of it. They can also say, well, look, that T wave, there wasn't a break between the T wave and the S wave, so we're having something misfiring in there. Kind of like it's skipping the space and jumping over. You can also tell if you get an extra wave in here that maybe there's another node going in there. So the EKG is basically only really testing that electrical process going on. It's not testing the nerve conduction. It's basically just testing this. Muscle contraction. So in muscle contraction, the most important thing to know about muscles or heart is that they are extremely, extremely dependent on calcium. So if you get too much calcium, you're going to have a problem with your muscles. If you have too little calcium in your blood, you're going to have a problem with the muscles of your heart. It's a big deal. The heart muscle is extremely, extremely unique because most muscles, when they use calcium, the calcium's in the muscle, it gets a signal, it opens up, it helps muscle fire. And in the heart, the signal is actually given by calcium. There's a channel that opens up on the outside of the muscle, it lets calcium come in, and then your reaction you get from the calcium inside is kind of exponential. So when the heart actually beats, the heart can pull down all the muscles at the same time. In your arms and even in your stomach and your guts, the muscles kind of go part way and then part way and then part way and then part way. It kind of makes this really nice slow contraction. Well, in the heart, it's all big, one big contraction. And that's because of the unique way that calcium is used in the heart. That's also why calcium channel blockers, things like that they use, can slow down your heart and it makes your heart not beat as hard. So people that are having a really hard heartbeat or they're having high blood pressure, some people they give a calcium channel blocker, and basically it's an intentional way of making your heart weaker. Probably better ways of doing it, but that's how they do it. Once the calcium happens or rolls over there and basically makes a signal for the heart to contract, the heart has to have ATP. And ATP is actually the energy source. And the most important thing I want you to know on all this whole slide is that your heart needs a lot of ATP to make that reaction happen quickly. And that ATP comes from mitochondria. And I'll explain more about that later. But the calcium, the fact that your heart needs calcium, the fact that calcium is extremely important, and it uses a lot of calcium, is extremely important. ATP comes from mitochondria, and that is your powerhouse in there. And also the coordination of your heart, the fact that it beats all at one time. It's an all or nothing kind of reaction. It's not a partial. It's all or nothing. Pressure. So basically the highest pressure in the heart is at the base of the heart, in the ventricles. And so the heart basically controls the pressure in your body. I may touch on it again later, but the important thing about the heart is most people see it as a pump. And we've been probably taught in 3rd grade, 4th grade that it's a pump. We'll get into it, but the heart does a lot more than pump. We talked about the heat, we talked about the other things. But whenever they tried to make artificial hearts, they tried to make a pump. And they thought, well, we'll just pump stuff in and pump it out and it'll be fine. The problem is the heart does more to control pressure than it probably actually does to pump the blood. And so whenever you make an artificial heart, you're having to control the pressure. And that pressure is not always sustained the same. It changes all the time. Whether I am breathing in, whether I'm breathing out, it makes a difference. If I try to breathe in, I put a lot of pressure in my lungs, and I also try to put a lot of pressure into my blood, you'll actually explode your lungs. You'll actually start bleeding in your lungs and die. So your heart has to basically monitor the pressure in the lungs and pump in the right pressure, whether you're exhaling or inhaling. It has to also govern, am I squatting down and pooping on the toilet and putting a lot of pressure on my blood vessels at the same time it pumps it out? So it really is a pressure regulator, your heart is, and it's very important. The bottom of the heart pumps out the hardest pressure. The highest pressure in your entire body is actually your aorta. And I think I'll show you that on a picture in a second. It's at the top of your heart. It's where the blood pressure, where the blood comes out of your left ventricle into the aorta and then gets disseminated out to your body. Pressure actually decreases as it gets farther away from the heart. A lot of people thought that the circulatory system was a closed system. So it's basically a loop that goes out and a loop that comes back. And that's kind of what that one picture showed you a while ago with Oregon. That's not real. It's not a closed system. It's very much an open system. So you'd almost have to think of it more if you have your sink in your house and you're running water out in your sink and then it's going down the drain. Well, there's an opening there. It gets other stuff in it. It goes through the sewer system, and then we're going to clean that up and we're going to put it back in the water system. That's how my hometown was. They used the sewer system to drink it again. But that's pretty much how your heart's pumping. So it's not a closed system. It's actually a very open system, and that's why we get sick too. So you get decreased pressure as we go out through the arteries. You get out to the smaller blood vessels, which are called capillaries. By the time you get to capillaries, there's very slow, very low pressure there. As you get to the veins, you actually have even less pressure. So if this was a closed system and we were running the pump and it went out and it went through the pipe and it came back, we would have the same pressure all the time, kind of like on a boiler system or something like that. If your pressure drops, you know you have a problem. That's why they couldn't just make a pump for this, because it went that way. Interesting enough, veins have valves in them. Your arteries don't, but your veins have these little valves that close off. And if anybody's seen varicose veins in your legs, typically that's when those valves break. Those valves get to where they're not syncing up together and basically they get too much pressure and they get pulled back. And so you pump the blood up and it settles down and now you get this bulging vein in there. That's why you get varicose veins, is because those valves break. If you didn't have those valves, and since it's not a closed, if you had a closed system, you wouldn't need valves. It would just crank around and go that way. In a closed system, when the heart beats, it goes up, goes through the valve closes, it holds it there until the next heartbeat to push on to the next step. So that's why, as we get older, we tend to get those faulty valves in there in our legs and stuff, and we start getting those pretty little purple lines on your legs and things. The left side of the heart, the right side of the heart is where we come back to the lungs. And let me see if the next picture I have. I'll come back to it. So the left side of the heart is basically pumping out to the body. The right side of the heart is pumping to the lungs. The lungs can't handle very much pressure. It's literally like a little light sponge, and it can break and crack easy. So the right side makes a low pressure pumping out the lungs. Left side pumps a really hard pressure out to the rest of the body there. So the oxygenated blood flows into the heart. It basically goes to the right atrium, which is the top. The right atrium basically slows down the pressure, regulates pressure, drops it into the right ventricle. The right ventricle says, okay, I need to send this to the lungs, and it knows how much pressure is there in it. It squeezes it out in the lungs at the right pressure, right timing, so the lungs can oxygenate it. It comes now oxygenated into the left atrium. The left atrium says, okay, that's a little low pressure. Let's build the pressure up in the atrium. Let's squeeze it down into the ventricle, and the ventricle just full out squishes the pudding out of it. The left ventricle also makes a vortex on it. So it's interesting that blood coming out of that left ventricle doesn't just squish out. It's not just normal squish. It comes out in a swirl like that. And that swirl is extremely significant. And most cardiologists actually don't know about that vortex. It's kind of interesting when you start looking it up. There's a number of doctors looking at it and figuring out what it does. But if you have a heart that's not made right, it doesn't make a vortex, and those people don't live very long. So your heart and the way it's made is extremely important. So we get to the left ventricle, and it squirts it out into the aorta and into the body, oxygenated. So here we go again. Basically, your blood is coming in from your body, goes into the right atrium, goes to the right ventricle. It lightly pushes it out into the lungs. The blood comes back from the lungs oxygenated, and basically then goes into the left ventricle, and it squeezes the pudding out of it. It squirts it right up into the aorta. And the aorta is very interesting. It has actually a lot of muscles in it. It actually has a bunch of layers in it that kind of contain that pressure. And then it basically pushes it real quick down into the abdominal area, down to the legs, into the abdominal aorta. But it also sends it up to the carotid arteries and up into your brain. It's interesting, the way this works right here and the way it's shaped makes a huge difference because there's so much pressure in here. If the same pressure went up in the carotid artery as goes in the rest of you, it would blow your brains out. And so it actually works out that the way this is shaped, it comes around here, and that vortex basically makes it so it swirls and keeps that from shooting straight up into your brain. So that vortex keeps you from blowing your brains out with your heartbeat. So it's kind of interesting. It does some other things I'll get to here in a little bit. There's also some interesting things that happen there. The lungs, when you breathe out carbon dioxide is acidic. It basically comes out as an acid. And so individuals that have lung problems or they have right ventricle problems, they come in, I do their urinalysis, I look them over, and if they're acidic, a lot of times we say, okay, we need to work on deep breathing, we need to fix your lungs, we need to do some things here, we may need to change diet. But I also started looking real close at the heart, I started looking real close at the lungs if you're acidic, because it can tell me that right there. So, here's where things get really interesting between functional cardiologists and your regular cardiologist. And the difference is, between those two, is a functional cardiologist is one that is looking for the underlying issues. So why are you having a heart problem? Instead of, well, you have high blood pressure, here's a pill for it. Why are you having high blood pressure? Why are you acidic, like I just talked about? Why are you having arrhythmia? You know, what's going on here? So this is where it comes down to it. Basically, William Harvey was the first one really credited for saying that the heart was a pump. He was an individual that believed everything in the world was just a mechanical thing. The way the moon moved, the way the earth moved, everything in your body was a mechanical thing. Eyelids, everything else. And he tried to describe everything as a mechanical process. And he says the heart's just a pump. And actually some of his own studies proved him wrong. He tried to do a straight circular pump with dogs and stuff, just putting a pump in, and they died right away. So, very interesting. Socrates came out, and Socrates basically says, I would agree the heart's a pump, but I think it's also a furnace or a heat generator, because blood that goes into the heart is one temperature, blood that comes out of the heart is a different temperature. So, he says, okay, there's something, it's not just a pump, there's something else going on here. Then you got Steiner comes along in the later 1800s, early 1900s, and he says, you know what? I don't think the heart is the only thing moving this blood. He says something else is moving this blood. And he didn't know quite what it was, but he knew something was there. Then Pollock came along, and Pollock says, yeah, this is very interesting, because we can take dogs, and we can stop their heart, and the blood keeps moving, sometimes up to 30 minutes after you've killed this dog. And we know it's not a closed system now, so how's this happening? So he comes along, and he does a bunch of experiments, and basically he says, there's a special water in the blood that's causing this. And that special water, he called it easy water, and I'm going to get more to it later. But he says there's something else moving this blood. It's not just the heart pumping it. Then now, right now, still alive right now, you have two professors And they are working on vortex theory. They have come back and they've looked at the different vortexes as it passes throughout the blood system, throughout that, and they say, wow, look at this. People that have the incorrect vortexes here are dying. And so they're actually working on computer models right now to basically give you an IV, monitor your vortexes, and to figure out what's the matter. So kind of interesting how important that is. So arteries. We talked about the heart, now we're going to talk about arteries. Arteries transport oxygenated blood. They maintain your blood pressure. So a lot of individuals don't realize that arteries are actually very, 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 very muscular, is what they are. So everybody realizes the heart is beating and contracting, but your arteries are relaxing and contracting. So most of the time when they're measuring your blood pressure, they're actually measuring how tight your arteries are and how loose they are. When your artery is basically loose, the pressure drops. Systole, that's when it drops. When your arteries are really tight, basically your systole goes way up. You get a higher blood pressure. And so there's some things that regulate this, and I'll go into it. But this is extremely important that you know that the muscles in the heart have a lot to do with your blood pressure. Muscles in your arteries, have a lot to do with your blood pressure. But also you need to know that there's muscles there. Because one of the leading problems of the heart actually comes from the muscles in your artery. So they regulate blood flow. So it not only maintains pressure. So let me give an example of what happens a lot of times. You go to the doctor and you have elevated blood pressure. So what do? Most common thing they'll put you on is a diuretic right off the bat. And especially older people, they put you on a diuretic. Well, the diuretic is going to work really well for about 24 to 72 hours. Because what happens is, let's say this is how big your blood vessel is, and the fluid's pumping through there, and everything's great. They're going to lower the fluid. You're going to pee out the fluid. And now that artery is going to drop down here because you lost fluid. And now that artery is really flimsy and soft. And so they take your blood pressure for the next 24, 72 hours. So like, oh, great, that diuretic just brought down your blood pressure. Isn't that great? Well, then something happens. Your body measures the amount of fluid that's in there and says, okay, we had this much fluid and I was this tight. Now we have this much fluid. I need to tighten down to get to that much fluid. So 24, 74 hours later, 72 hours later, all of a sudden your blood pressure is back up. And they're like, oh man, that's bad. Now let's put you on another medication. Well, probably that diuretic probably wasn't the right thing. Once in a while, it's the right thing, especially on diabetics, individuals like that. A lot of times, not the right thing. Then, arteries distribute oxygenated blood. When they come back, it's veins. On the way out, it's oxygenated blood. And so, basically, what's interesting about arteries, and I'm going to show you this in a picture in a little bit, is you would think that those muscles in that artery, that the oxygen to those muscles is supplied from that tube out to the muscles. It's not. They actually have small little capillaries wrapped around all of these arteries that are actually supplying the oxygen to the artery. So it's kind of funny that nothing is really getting in and out of the artery. The artery is actually just a pipeline. So it's very important to know that. This is the picture I wanted to show you, so I just didn't know where it was. So when we look at our artery, we have a really nice picture of a lining in it, endothelium. And that's your cells that kind of line the inside of it. It's kind of like Teflon. That's kind of what it looks like. So you have Teflon on the inside of your arteries. And then you have a little layer on the outside that kind of looks like cellophane actually. And then you have another layer that looks kind of like a rubber band. When you open up the artery and you look at it, it kind of looks like, so you have a slick Teflon layer, you basically have a cellophane layer, you have a rubber band layer, and then you have your muscle around it. And then basically you have another little, another rubber band layer holding it all together. But the vasa vasorum is the small blood vessels that feed all of that. They don't get anything out of the actual blood flowing through it. You actually have to get out these little capillaries to feed the arteries. And it's extremely important that you know that the arteries are fed that way. Inside that artery, you have the endothelium, which as I said is the Teflon. Well, a lot of times if people cook, as you know, Teflon's supposed to keep stuff from sticking to it, but it doesn't quite do it good. You usually still put some oil on there or you put some stuff on there to keep it from sticking to Teflon. Inside your arteries, there is a layer, and this is a little layer across here, all these little things here, that is on the inside. And that layer is called the glycocalyx. That glycocalyx is a lot like jelly, or jello, I should say. It's kind of watery, but it's kind of jiggly. but it's actually like the oil you'd put in your pan before you put it in there. So the cells go running past it, and they don't stick to it. Well, you have all those old doctors, Pollock and several others that were talking about the easy water. Well, they were saying that these blood vessels are lined with easy water. There's several other names for it. And everybody says, well, you're a kook, you're crazy, you're crazy, crazy. And it's much like in the medical world, basically, holistic doctors will come out and say, well, you know, you have leaky gut. You have leaky gut. And Michael, oh, there's no such thing. No such thing. Well, then they start coming out with medications for it. And now they call it excess permeability, is what they call it. Well, then we would say, well, you know, you need more digestive enzyme. You're lacking digestive enzyme. Oh, there's no such thing, no such thing. And now they have a drug out there for pancreatic insufficiency. It's basically a patented digestive enzyme. Well, same thing's happening here. Basically, all these functional people said, there is easy water there. There's this hydro water here. Here's all this stuff here. It actually is the protective lining on the inside of blood vessels, so things don't hurt it and things just go through easy. No, there's not. No, there's not. Now they're like, you know, there's this glycocalyx. It's this watery layer on the inside of the artery. So it's there, you know, and now it's just called glycocalyx. And so the glycocalyx is a protective layer inside the arteries. And basically it helps also with cell recognition. So those little layers, let me see if I can go back. These little things inside of it, so the water layer is here, and basically all those little things inside of it basically are monitoring. It's kind of like a bunch of little sensors monitoring what's going on. Okay, what's the thermostat here? Is it too hot? Okay, is there a bad guy here? This is my security system. This is my camera system. It's doing all those little things, and it's all inside there. So basically it's monitoring. It's recognizing if stuff sticks to it. It's measuring damage. It's doing all those kind of things. Here's where the other names come in place. So they've called it structured water. They've called it fourth phase water. They've called it the exclusion zone. They've called it bound water. And then now it's called the glycocalyx. And now I will say the functional medicine cardiologists have been on top of this for probably 2 or 3 decades. And now they're actually being invited to talk to the regular cardiologist. My cardiologist is a functional cardiologist. I had an enlarged heart when I was an athlete. I tore up my heart pretty good. And so, as I'm talking to you, I'm talking to myself about all this stuff. But I go see a functional cardiologist, and he's been talking about it for years. Well, now he's on the lecture circuit talking to every cardiology thing, and he actually got kicked out of the hospital because he would take people and fix them without doing surgery on them, and they thought that was the worst thing in the world because they weren't making enough money off him. He makes more money now than all the rest of the cardiologists. In fact, he's the one that all the cardiologists see. So it's nice. So that's the glycocalyx. The glycocalyx is very important. We'll come back to it. So the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is really the stepchild of all systems. If you're in school and they talk about the systems of the body, it would be very rare that they ever talk about the lymphatic system. Sometimes if they're lucky, they'll throw it in with the immune system, but it's its own thing. The lymphatic system is basically it looks like a sponge. If you actually dissect people and you look at it real closely, it looks as if you took a sponge and you ripped it out into a long piece. So if you take a sponge and you kind of just uncurl it until you get a long piece, that's kind of what it looks like, a long sponge with a little bit of cellophane around it, really weak cellophane around it. And then you get the lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes in your groin area. You have about 60% of your lymph nodes are around your guts. And then you have them in your armpit and up in your neck area. The lymphatic system's job, let me see, I think I have some of this here. Lymphatic system's job is to carry back what left the arteries. So the arteries go out to capillaries, and basically fluid goes out into the capillaries, bathes them, brings them nutrients, brings them fat, brings them everything they need to grow, all the cells and everything. That fluid doesn't make it back to your blood. It basically is setting out in the tissues and basically gets pulled back in the lymphatic system. The interesting thing about the lymphatic system is the lymphatic system is not necessarily being pumped like your blood is. So your blood's being pumped and circulated. The lymphatic system is kind of that spongy material. So you have all the fluid out there, and basically it soaks it back up like a sponge does. And when you walk, when you move, you squish that lymphatic fluid. And it gets squished a little farther up, and new fluid comes in. You squish it, and it comes back up, and you squish it, and it comes back up. And it gets to your lymph nodes. Your lymph nodes actually have white blood cells in them, macrophages in them, things that eat bad things. So anytime you stub your toe, you get a little cut on your leg and bad bacteria and stuff get into your body tries to attack it, kill it. Well, it pulls it into the lymphatic system. Then when it gets up to your lymph node, it basically filters it and cleans it out so the lymph can keep going. It can get overwhelmed, but that's what it's doing. So it basically carries the fluid back through the circulatory system. It has a whole bunch of immune components in it. So it has antibodies in it, it has white blood cells in it, it has cytokines, interleukins, all those things that help your body fight off stuff. So it's actually probably one of the most important things in your immune system. But it's also extremely, extremely, extremely important for your circulatory system. If it's not working right, you may not notice it right away, but you're going to have a heart problem, without a doubt. It's coming. And I'll explain more why in a little bit. It helps with fluid balance over your entire body. So you'll see there are people in our community here that probably people would look at and go, that person's fat, that person's heavy. Whenever you come down to it, they actually have very little fat on them. If you do a DEXA scan on them, they're not fat. They're basically carrying around way too much lymphatic fluid. So they're having an immune response to things. The lymph nodes are filters. They trap the bacteria and viruses and helps clean them out. Basically, the lymphatic system starts out at your farthest extremities, comes up and goes to the lymph nodes, filters through them, and comes back up to the top of the superior vena cava and drains back in the heart. So every time the heart beats, it goes, sucks on the end of that sponge. So if I had a glass here and I put a sponge in it and I started sucking on it, after a while I could empty the glass. That's the way it works. But motion does more than the suction of the heart. So if I have a sponge and I'm stuck on, that's going to come up there real quick. But if I take the sponge and go squeeze it, I get it back into me. So people that have lymphatic problems and they don't move, they're going to have more lymphatic problems. It just kind of builds up. And 60% of your lymph nodes are around your gut. And the reason is, food, when you eat it and you digest it, leaves your digestive tract. It doesn't actually go straight in your bloodstream. It actually goes in the lymphatic system and then gets pulled up the heart and then it gets sent out to where it needs to go. So individuals that have food sensitivities are going to have lymphatic problems. You end up going to have a heart problem. So if you don't take care of those food sensitivities, you're like, well, I know I shouldn't eat gluten. Well, yeah, you're going to have a heart problem and things like that. Yep.
Lymph nodes seem to be susceptible to cancer?
Yeah, because they're picking up all the bad stuff. So let's say you're eating a bunch of poison, you're eating a bunch of preservatives, you're eating a bunch of things like that, your body takes it, puts it into the lymphatic system, it takes it to the lymph node. The lymph node's your filter. That's where basically it pulls it in, and now it tries to clean it up. Your white blood cells come, your immune system comes, tries to clean it up. Sometimes it can't clean it up. And what happens, instead of it cleaning up and getting rid of it, it changes the cells in the lymph node, and you get cancer in there. Also, let's say you do have another cancer. Let's say you have breast cancer, prostate cancer, whatever it be. Your body tries to get rid of cancer. It does everything it can to try to kill it and get rid of it. So it starts pulling it off the tumor. It gets it into your lymphatic system. It's going to try to get rid of it, and it gets into a lymph node and gets stuck there, and all of a sudden starts growing in your lymph node, and you get cancer there. So lymph nodes are actually doing their job whenever they get cancer. They're trying to clean it up from other parts of the body, but they just get overwhelmed and can't do it. So
no way to underwhelm them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll get to that.
Are lymph nodes also in charge of the glands?
Glands are different. So glands are secretory, which means they expel stuff. So glands make chemicals and spit them out. Lymph nodes basically take in stuff and filter it and process it. So glands are not lymph nodes. I take that back. So what's in the medical world and in the layman's world, some people use it in exchange of each other. Oh, look at that, you got swollen glands. No, you don't. You have swollen lymph nodes. They're actually saying it wrong. Mm-hmm. It's like people who come to me and they say, Doc, I'm having horrible hip pain. Oh, my hip hurts. I'm sorry, that's your low back and your pelvis. Your hip is out here. So it's kind of the same thing. They're just renaming something incorrectly. So you can have swollen glands, which would be your salivary gland. You can have a swollen thyroid, but that's not what they're referring to. They're touching your lymph nodes and calling it a gland, so they're totally wrong. Yeah, good question. So this is the relationship between the lymphatic system and the cardiovascular system. Basically, it returns the fluid It takes care of the immune problems. And then it's interconnected with the circulatory system in the fact that all your capillaries come out, and right next to all of them is your lymphatic system, and it comes back up and pumps into the top of the heart. Where you get a problem with this is when you cut this system. So individuals that have had hysterectomies, individuals that have had their gallbladder taken out, individuals that have had any kind of surgery in this area, the medical world cares very little about the lymphatic system. And sometimes they'll even go in there and they'll cut you open and they actually suck it out and stuff. And because it just looks like spongy material in there. Well, all of a sudden that person comes out of surgery and like, I didn't have this belly before that and now I can't get rid of it. I'm doing setups, I'm doing everything else. That's your lymphatic system. Now your lymph is coming up out of your legs and you've cut that chain and now it's just sitting there and now you're going to have to get activity. You're going to have to do deep breathing and stuff to squish that fluid from here so it gets picked back up in the sponge again. So that's a real thing. Or you have people that are doing food sensitivities again. Every lymph node in between here is basically clogged up. So everything that's come out of your legs hits those lymph nodes. And now you got this big old belly on you. You're like, I don't know what I got going on, you know. Well, let's take care of the food sensitivity. Let's see if you've had surgeries. Let's try to get it moving. That's what we do there. So it's very important. So now that was the stepchild of the thing. Now we're going to talk about kidneys. So a lot of people don't understand that kidneys are connected to the circulatory system, but they are extremely connected to the circulatory system. The kidneys get rid of waste, first of all, and that waste is actually come out of your blood. You have blood vessels that come in. There's a little round conglomerate of blood vessels called the glomerulus, and basically it's right up against a really thin layer called the basement membrane. I consider this a lot like if anybody's ever done automotive painting or you've done painting and you had to filter the paint through a little paper filter or whatever. That's what that glomerular apparatus looks like. So blood flows in top, junk flows through, and as it comes out of the bottom side of that, then your body has a whole bunch of processes. It pulls in sugar back in, it pulls sodium back in, it pulls everything it thinks is valuable back in, and the rest goes out as waste. As you damage that membrane, antifreeze, things like that, if you get in poison, you get in food preservatives and things like that, it starts popping little holes in. If you have your paper filter and you start pouring paint through there and it has holes in it, all of a sudden you're going to get other stuff come through. You start losing stuff. You start losing your sugar. You start losing your sodium. And that's a kidney issue. So kidneys are a filter. They clean the blood. And they regulate blood pressure. I'm going to get more into it, but there's a thing called the RAAS, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And it takes into account the kidneys. It takes into account the liver. And it takes into account the lungs. And all three of those work together to control blood pressure. So you have your heart controlling pressure using the valves. You also have your arteries controlling the pressure using the arteries. And now you have the kidneys controlling it too. The kidneys also make EPOA, erythropoietin. And this is what makes your red blood cells. So you have individuals that stop making red blood cells. You give them erythropoietin and they start making red blood cells. Some individuals genetically make too much erythropoietin and they have too much blood. And sometimes they either have to come in and work with the kidneys or sometimes you have to give blood to take it down. Then, and I already said the waste removal. I actually skipped to that one first. The lungs. So the lungs actually influence angiotensin. So I talked about the renin-angiotensin system right there. They're also incorporated into it. I'm going to get more into that in a little bit. The lungs exchange gas. So your cardiovascular system, one of its jobs is to take oxygen out. There's many other jobs it does actually, but one of the jobs is to take oxygen out. I talked before about the lungs. Basically, the blood comes in with carbon dioxide in it. It exchanges it, brings oxygen back in. It also is a major system for pH balance in your body. Pulmonary circulation, basically the lungs take up volume. They actually hold volume in them. So it's kind of a little bit of blood storage too. And they oxygenate and send it back, and then pH. The liver. So the liver makes angiotensin. So angiotensin, I'll get to it. I have actually a slide on this. So it makes angiotensin. So that's again part of that RAAS system that controls your blood pressure. We'll get back to that. It stores a ton of blood. The liver is full of blood. If anybody's ever hunted or anybody eats liver, it's full of iron, it's full of blood, and that's where you get your nutrients from. The liver has about 800 jobs. There's about 400 are actually digesting stuff. There's probably 300 that has to do with your immune system. And then there's a ton of it that has to do with blood clotting and how your blood works in your body. And so that's extremely important. Many people that end up with liver problems end up with bruising or bleeding and that kind of stuff. And they have problems and they think, well, that's a totally different thing. It's because of their liver. Digestion. So all the food goes through your digestive wall, goes into your lymphatic system, it goes up the heart, then gets pumped to the liver, and then the liver actually takes those molecules and makes them into usable products. So it doesn't actually digest the food, but it takes the digested food and makes it into usable products. So it's the intermediary, basically. Your liver detoxifies. It cleans out a lot of junk out of our body. So chemicals that our body can't use, it comes in at first, it tries to make them into chemicals it can use. And then after a while, it'll say, okay, let's package these, try to get rid of them in bile salts. So usually your bile that comes out has cholesterol in it, it has salts in it, and it has toxins in it that you basically are pooping out those toxins out of your liver. When the liver can't break down those toxins, it actually pushes it out to the skin. Your skin is one of your biggest detoxifiers in your body. So individuals that have myofibralgia and that kind of thing, what's happened is the liver can't clean it up. And a lot of times these are immune processes. So let's just say, gluten. That's an easy one to say. Gluten is digested. Your body puts an antibody on it, which means a flag saying this is a bad guy. It goes into your lymphatic system. It gets pumped up the heart. And by the way, the whole time it's going through your circulatory system, when your body thinks it's a bad guy, everybody's hitting on it, trying to attack it. So it gets in your lymphatic system. The lymph nodes are swelling. They're trying to beat on it. They're trying to kill it. They're trying to do it. They know it's a bad guy. It goes up to your heart, and your heart, all the little antibodies in it are trying to hit on it. Well, they don't care about collateral damage. They're banging on the walls and everything, just killing, kicking, and they're kicking the person next to them and everything else. So you're having problems when you have it. Well, it gets the liver. And the liver sometimes cleans it up, gets rid of it. And it can do that for a little while. But when you get too much toxins in there and too much stuff the liver can't take care of, instead of killing you and dying, because it still has to process other stuff, it says, okay, I'm on overload. It takes that stuff, it shoves it to the skin, and you end up with psoriasis and things. So psoriasis is actually an overload of the liver system not being able to clean up toxins. So the other big issue with the liver is lipid metabolism. Lipids are fats. So cholesterol, all your LDL, all those things. The liver makes the most amount of all your lipids. So diet changes it. You can manipulate with diet, but your liver makes it. And actually your liver excretes most of it as bile salts. So typically your bile salts, when you eat, let's say you eat something fatty, take a spoonful of butter, and your liver pumps out a ton of bile salts, which is like 95% cholesterol. In a healthy person that's eating properly and getting vegetables and getting other stuff, it goes down about a foot in your small intestines and it gets reabsorbed, or it sticks to the vegetables and the fibers and you poop it out. So a lot of your people with cholesterol issues are not eating vegetables. I can come in and say, so what's your cholesterol? My cholesterol is like 300. Okay, how much vegetables do you eat? Well, I eat corn on the cob and I eat pasta and all that. I say, hold on. You're telling me that, but what's the vegetables you're eating? Well, what do you mean? So those are all grains. You're not eating vegetables and stuff. So it can be changed. But what I really want you to know is that the liver basically stores blood. It helps with clotting factors, but the angiotensin, the RAAS factor, is a big deal. So here, this is where it all ties together with the liver, the kidney, and the lungs. Basically, renin is released by the kidney, and it's released due to low blood pressure. It decreases sodium levels, or it's released because of low blood pressure, decreased sodium levels, or the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, again, is your fight or flight. So fight or flight, all of a sudden it says, okay, we need to release this renin. Renin you need checkpoints. You can't just have your liver or your kidney say increased blood pressure, because if you're having problems in your kidney, basically you'll blow a gasket. So it has to have checks and balances. It's kind of like the U.S. government. You have the House, you have the Senate, and you have the President. It's a similar situation here. So angiotensin renin is converted to angiotensin in the liver. So the liver says, okay, we're checking the blood pressure. I agree with you, kidney. we need to increase it. So I'm now going to turn your renin into angiotensin. We're going to pass this bill on over to the lungs. In the lungs, basically ACE, which is angiotensin converting enzyme, ACE makes angiotensin 2. ACE is important because ACE is where doctors come in and give you lisinopril. They give you a lot of the medications and they actually cut this off. It's an ACE inhibitor. So when you cut off ACE, basically you're going to the lungs and saying, yeah, I don't want you increasing the blood pressure. I want you to drop this blood pressure. Interesting enough, whenever you cut ACE off and don't allow it to do its job, you tend to build up a mucus in the lungs. So if anybody in here has been on like a lisinopril or an ACE inhibitor, you're going to find you get that. And sometimes it'll get a cough, but usually it starts out as a little hack. And you can know it, especially it tends to be older people who don't drink enough water. They'll get that. You'll just be in a restaurant or you'll be in the grocery store and you're because it's thick. It's thick, white, clearish fluid, and that's actually the ACE and the angiotensin that you're spitting up when you do it. Interesting enough, a lot of these people that are put on angiotensin inhibitors are the same ones that die with pulmonary distress. So here you basically took the individual, you're saving the heart, we're going to lower the blood pressure, lower blood pressure, and then either they get killed, they die with pneumonia, or they just say, oh yeah, you have COPD or emphysema. Like, I've never smoked, I've never worked in a coal mine, how's that possible? Well, you've been on an angiotensin inhibitor for 20 years, and basically you just drowned in your own slobber is what happened. So that's an interesting thing that happens there. So, and then basically, yeah, there you go. And by the way, there's times you need to bring down the blood pressure. There's a lot of times you can do it different ways. You can get it fit, you can lose some weight, we can change your water content. So, and this is probably a good time to talk about this. I talked about water, and they put you on a diuretic, and basically diuretic shrinks that muscle and makes it tighter, and now you take blood pressure and it's even higher than what it was a couple days ago. Interesting enough, you take that same individual and you give them an IV in the hospital. And for the next week, their blood pressure is normal. So if I just gave them fluid and their blood pressure normalized for a week or maybe even 2 weeks, maybe I should ask this patient how much water they're drinking. You know, maybe I should see what their fluid intake is. And yeah, and you gave them sodium. We'll get to that later. So the water, you give them water. So very first thing to do, if you have high blood pressure, period, is drink more water. Drinking a glass of water, 8-ounce glass of water in the morning time, first thing, if that's the first thing you do in your day, every study out there they've done on drops your chances of stroke and heart attack that day by 65%. So that's the easiest way to help yourself from having a heart attack that day is drink water first thing in the morning time.
Water versus tea?
Oh, 1,000 times over. A tea is a diuretic. Even most of your herbal teas are diuretics. So they will actually make you pee out. That kidney and the nephron I was talking about, it actually opens it up and makes you pee out more. So you put in tea, and you're like, yeah, that's good. I hydrated myself, especially green tea. So green tea, they always talk about you losing weight. It's because it pulls all the fluid out of you. So you take in a glass of green tea and you pee out 2 glasses of fluid. And that's the way it works. So definitely coffee is a diuretic. Tea is a diuretic.
Does it matter if it's warm or cool?
No, I don't believe it would. Don't believe it would. I will say this, drinking clear water in the morning time actually changes your whole brain for the rest of the day. There's been studies done on this. So if you drink water first thing in the morning time, take it and drink it, versus anything, even a colored water, even dyed water or tea or coffee, your brain sees it totally different way. We are still so primitive that your brain says, hey, we must be next to a clean, fresh stream today. I can be thirsty. I'm going to drink more water today. You drink, literally take a thing of water and you dye it brown and give it to somebody and they drink it first thing in the morning time. The rest of the day, they hardly drink anything. And the brain says, oh, I'm not next to fresh, clean water today. I'm next to a muddy pond, or this is maybe contaminated water. Your brain says, I'm not going to be thirsty today. So drinking a thing of clean water first thing in the morning time sets you up for the rest of your day not to have a heart attack, stroke, but also to drink more water. Now, let's say you drink the water. You go get the IV at the hospital. What happens? The blood vessel has more volume to it now. And first of all, it's not as thick. It's a lot thinner. So now it's flowing through easier. Instead of having all these cells crammed together trying to squeeze through there, now the blood's a lot thinner. It goes through easier. The blood vessel opens up. If I go to squish your hands, and I squish them like this, I can squish them pretty easy. So it doesn't take much pressure to squish it. If I take your hand and do it like that, and I try to squish it, it's going to take a lot more pressure. Well, if you put volume into your blood vessel, it squishes a lot easier. Your blood pressure drops. So it's interesting that we kind of have this backwards. The only time that you should probably be on a diuretic, and the only time they ought to take you away from fluids instead of putting you on it, is if you have congestive heart failure. In congestive heart failure, your heart's not beating hard enough anymore to squish the blood through, and so any volume in there is just harder. So I can basically push something through with less volume easier than I can a lot of volume. So if your heart's actually not beating good, your muscles are not working right, yeah, put them on a diuretic. Get the fluid out of there, bring it down as low as you can. But no, that person's on end of life care. You know, that's not, and maybe it's end of life is 5 years, you don't know. But that's the person you put on a diuretic, not the 30-year-old who comes in with high blood pressure, not the 40-year-old who comes in with high blood pressure. Be very careful about putting them on a diuretic. And they do it. A lot of times they put them on a combination diuretic ACE inhibitor. So it's kind of an interesting problem. And you can go and give that person water, watch them over next week, and they don't need that anymore. You know, there's some other hormone things you can do too, but that's the big one there. So that explains the RAAS. So when you go to a regular medical doctor and they're looking at heart issues, this is basically the list of what your diagnosis is going to be about. This is exactly, you're going to get one of these diagnoses. You're going to get, hey, you have high blood pressure. Oh yeah, you have coronary artery disease. Basically, it's narrowing of the arteries and that. You're going to have a heart attack. You're going to have heart failure, arrhythmias, strokes, peripheral artery disease, which is basically narrowing of the arteries instead of the heart. Valve disease. You asked about a murmur earlier. A murmur is a valve problem. So you have valves between your aorta and your ventricle. And those valves come down and they're supposed to fit just nice and perfect. Close up, come up, nice and perfect. Well, there's things that happen. You get strep throat, and basically strep comes in, it lines the inside of those valves, and then your body attacks it and tries to kill it. And I talked about a while ago, kicking things and collateral damage. It doesn't care that your heart valve's down. It kills that strep. Well, strep has toxins in it. And basically, whenever you kill strep, it blows open and it basically hurts that valve. And so now the valves come down and they're not touching together properly. And so when you listen to somebody's heart, you hear, well, I didn't mean to spit on you, like that. And, so anyway, yeah, don't sit in the front row. Michael, you did the right move, man. So anyway, you hear this fluttery, weird sound, and that's a murmur in there. And so you can be born with bad heart valves. You can have infections that cause heart valve problems. You can just have weak heart valves. Or, like me, I was an athlete, and my heart got so big that your heart and the muscles can grow, but your valves don't grow. Your valves are actually the same size. So if my heart gets bigger and bigger, now they don't meet up. And so now my heart's shrunk. I don't work out like I used to. My heart's shrunk, and now actually my murmur's gone away. So I've had it checked now. Check it about every 3 years, and the last 2 times, there's no murmur there, which is kind of incredible because I just figured, okay, I'll be 50 and have to have a heart valve replacement. So that was good news for me. Aneurysms. So when we talked about the layers of the arteries, basically when you have an aneurysm, what's happened is basically the blood has broken through the glycocalyx, it's broken through the endothelium, it's broken through the cellophane, it's kind of gotten that muscle tissue, and then all of a sudden it's broken through the muscle tissue, and you get this either big bubble on it, and that's an aneurysm. A ruptured aneurysm is when it breaks all the way through, and you're in bad shape when that happens. My first week working for the Red Cross, my job was to make sure people got the right blood, and I did transplant, making sure people got the right organs and stuff. I get there, and I'd had a lot of training before I got there, but most people that come and work for the Red Cross have had very little training. And so I got there, and my first month or so was supposed to be shadowing people and reading the books, reading the manuals. Well, in the first, I want to say 4 days of me being there, one of the senators in Missouri had an aneurysm rupture. And so they life flighted him up to University of Missouri, and that's where I was working at. They came in, and the other people in the lab couldn't keep up. So I went over and I cross-matched like 140 some units for this guy. They were really trying to save him. That was a lot of units. And we ended up saving him for about 2 months. But anyway, my supervisor comes in and says, oh my God, you just did 140 some units. you're not signed off to do anything. I said, well, the guy was going to die. And so she went around to all my other lab tests. Did he do okay? Like, yeah, he actually did it better than all the rest of us did, and he's good to go. Point was, if you have an aneurysm, if you're not a senator, you're in bad shape. Because typically, the most blood they typically give a regular patient is about 10 units. If you rupture an aortic aneurysm, you're going to go through 10 units in probably 10 minutes or less. And so you don't want to have an aneurysm. So it's something nowadays they come in, they put a stent in, or they wrap it around with a sleeve around it. They can catch it. If they catch it early, they can save you. People get aneurysms in the cranium. People get aneurysms on the aorta. That was the valve or the artery I said was the main one that has the most pressure on it. And then abdominal aorta. That's where most of your aneurysms happen that are going to cause you problems. Congenital heart defects, these are ones you're born with. So your little baby's in neonatal hospital and everything. That's what doctors are going to do. And then lipid levels. This is probably where doctors are probably getting their most uneducation right now is probably what I'd say. They're getting their most education. Oh, we got to put everybody on a statin drug. And we got to get them on. We got to get them on quick because that's what's causing your atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is your hardening of your arteries. Atherosclerosis is the number one reason you have heart failure. No, atherosclerosis is, other than the defects here, atherosclerosis is the number one cause for all these things, really. For most, there's a couple. Heart valve, give me a break though. For 99% of these, it's atherosclerosis. They're concerned about the lipid levels and all that, and they're putting people on statins. Next month, I'm 99% sure I'm doing cholesterol and statin drugs and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to get to that later. But I'm going to show you in a little bit that lipid levels are probably not your main cause for atherosclerosis. And I think that's why I'm speeding through everything else so fast, is because I want to get to that part of it. So medical diagnosis and everything are usually and often symptoms, not causes. And I could go on probably all day with this, but there's a couple great stories. One of them, I had a patient and we were working on her. She was having myofibralgia. She was having muscle pain and just aches and pains all over. Test her out, and she actually had a couple food sensitivities that were off the chart. I mean, even they couldn't even read them. They actually said greater than is what the food sensitivities were. And so we come in and we're treating for that. She's actually getting significantly better. She goes to her medical doctor, and the medical doctor says, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, your diagnosis is myofibralgia." And she's like, "Oh, thank God I got a diagnosis." She comes in to me and she says, "Oh, I'm so thankful my medical doctor was able to give me my diagnosis." And I said, "Okay, what's your diagnosis?" Just myofibralgia. I said, "Okay, well, what?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's my diagnosis." I said, "And so what are you going to do about it?" He said, "Oh, I don't know. He didn't tell me what he was going to do about it." I said, "Do you know what that means?" And she just says, "Well, no." I said, "Myo means muscle, and fibro means the layer around your muscle hurts. So basically, he just told you that your diagnosis is that the layer around your muscles hurts." She goes, "What? That's what he told me?" Or you get individuals that will come in and they have other diagnoses, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, doctor, I'm dying. I have lumbago. I'm dying." And I'll say, "Really? So the back pain that you had is killing you?" "What? You have lumbago. That means back pain." "Oh, serious?" So whenever they tell you you have atherosclerosis, they're basically saying you got hardening of the arteries. That's this. Well, the hardening of your arteries is a symptom. So anytime they do it, and in defense of doctors, the reason this is done is because of insurance. So insurance, for the doctors to get paid, for you to get paid back, they have to put in what's called an ICD-10 code, or an ICD-9 code is what it used to be. And when they first came out, if you didn't have a diagnosis code to put in there, you didn't get paid back. You don't get paid back. So they start coming up with all these lists of diagnosis codes. Well, funny thing is, the insurance company pretty much wrote the diagnosis codes. So almost none of them are true diagnosis. Most all of them are, you have tightness here, or pain here, or this or that. And it's actually very hard for me to find a diagnosis code that is what I would call a diagnosis. Even thyroid, "Oh, you have low thyroid." Oh, okay, why? It isn't that you have a T3 dysfunction. That's not a code. So now, what has gone wrong to get us to this point? When we're talking about the heart, we can have a nerve conduction problem. So this problem is going to be one. I'm going to go into each one of these, but it can be a problem with the autonomic nervous system. You can have electrical problems. You can have problems where the muscles aren't firing right. You can have a blood flow problem. Maybe you're not vortexing. Maybe you're not causing something. You can have a pressure system problem. Maybe you're throwing too much pressure into the lungs. Maybe you're not putting enough pressure out. You can have an immune problem. I just talked about strep throat coming down, getting on your valve and causing a problem there. But this is probably the number one thing, and this is going to be the last of what we talk about tonight. It's going to be quite a bit. Is mitochondrial health, mitochondrial function. Mitochondria, if I haven't said it in here yet, I've talked about it in a couple other talks. Mitochondria is the power source for your cell. So it is the coal-burning power plant, the generator in there, the natural gas plant. It makes all the power for your cell, which then makes that cell do its job. And so when it goes wrong, everything goes wrong. So nerve conduction, sympathetic nervous system. So let's say you're an individual who is always in fight or flight. You're always panicked, you're always worried, you're always, uptight. Well, it basically sends chemicals to your heart, and it causes your heart to beat harder and faster, and it also constricts your blood vessels so the blood gets pushed through real fast so it gets to your muscles. So if you're a person who's in fight or flight all the time, you're going to have a sympathetic problem, which is going to cause you some heart problems. If you're a person who is in parasympathetic, and these are people who have usually had injuries like car accidents, and most people are not in parasympathetic unless they're a drug addict, they have been in a car accident or got their brain smashed. And so that's not most of us. But on the other hand, let's say you're a person who this happened in COVID actually. There's actually a thing called inactivity syndrome, or use it or lose it syndrome is the common name for it. I had an individual who was an engineer, and they basically sent him to work from home. And so he sat at his desk in the dark basement all the time, just sitting at his desk. And then when he'd get done working anytime, he would move over to his lazy chair and play video games all night. And so he never had any excitement in his life, never had anything in his life, and pretty soon he dropped into parasympathetics. Well, interesting, his heart rate dropped, his blood pressure dropped. Pretty soon he wasn't even circulating blood to his feet anymore. He wasn't circulating blood anywhere, and all of a sudden his heart's not doing good, he's not doing good, and basically you just dwindle down, and you can have a 30, 40-year-old guy who basically looks like a person in a nursing home because they made their parasympathetics dry. So in nerve conduction, what has gone wrong? So we can have stress issues, but we can also have nutritional deficiencies. And a lot of times in modern times right now, the stress and the nutritional deficiencies go hand in hand. Magnesium, and this is a great one that medical doctors miss 99.9% of the time. Magnesium basically relaxes you, takes you out of stress things. Your kidneys use it to relax down. All your neurons use it to relax down. So if you're stressed out, you need the right magnesium. And it depends on your body type and what's going on and what magnesium we give you. But, interesting enough, the medical world will come back and I'll say, you need magnesium. You know, you're under stress. Your pupils are huge. Your reflexes are kicking off the wall. You're in sympathetic response. You need magnesium. You go to your medical doctor and say, well, you know, we can run a blood test for that. They run the blood test and they're like, no, your magnesium's fine. It's in low normal, so you're fine. Well, your body, for all these blood counts, for the most part, your body will go and take it out of everywhere it can. It'll come up to your brain, take out all the magnesium. It'll come to your muscles and take out magnesium because you've got to have it in your blood to make things work. And your blood takes priority over everything else. So it'll take magnesium, put in the blood. It'll take calcium out of your bones and put in the blood. Everything goes to the blood first because that's where are doctors testing? They're testing your blood. So if they're not a functional doctor looking for other signs and symptoms, they often miss that you're magnesium deficient. And guess what? You're magnesium deficient. It shows up in your blood. Oh, wow, look, your reflexes are high. Oh, yeah, I see that all the time with people. Oh, your pupils are big. Wow, yeah, your pupils are big. Well, you're not sleeping at nighttime now because you're anxious and everything. Your heart rate now is tachycardia. It's over 100 beats a minute, and it's day and night that way. Well, you come in, a functional doctor says, wow, your heart rate's tachycardia. Your pupils are big. I beat you with a hammer and you kicked me. I'm going to put you on some magnesium. 2 weeks later, wow, you're not in tachycardia anymore. You're not as anxious and everything. Same way. Potassium basically modulates how the muscle fires in that. So you get people coming in and maybe they're not getting blood flow like they should, and so we give them some potassium and things change. B vitamins. B vitamins can go either way, parasympathetic or sympathetic, and then electrolyte balance. We talked about potassium, magnesium, sodium, and all that, but electrolytes in general is that group of them with sodium and all that, chloride and that together. So you'll get individuals in here and their sodium levels are, let's say, low normal. The medical world says they're normal, and I'd argue that they're not normal. And then their chloride levels are high. Well, they're supposed to be in balance. And so if one is super low and one is super high, your nerves that conduct down to it are not going to work right. So in general, your nervous system works similar to your arteries. Basically, a nerve pulse comes through. It's not like you plug it in and there's just a solid state like on a DC battery or whatever. It's not a solid line. Basically, it's a pulse that goes out. And as it goes out, basically as it goes down through your nerve, it turns on positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, and it pushes down until it gets the signal there. Well, it takes sodium, it takes potassium to basically make that signal happen. It takes magnesium to shut the signal off. Otherwise, it just keeps repeating. So if I don't have enough magnesium and I get a nervous thought, well, I'm nervous the rest of the day because it never shut it down. So these electrolytes and that need to be in balance. And when you run blood work, you see it. But when you add blood work to a functional exam, you really see it. You can pinpoint it pretty quickly. So this is where we talk about sodium and that. Sodium is the key for depolarization. So when I said it turns on and off, basically the sodium turns it off and then the potassium turns it on. And that's the way it goes. And then magnesium basically works with those calcium channels and sodium pumps. So the magnesium comes in basically just tells the whole system, okay, we're done, calm down. But also magnesium is what regulates that calcium channel at the heart. So you got somebody that comes in, they're beating at 130 beats per minute, and the medical world's like, oh, we're going to put you on a calcium channel blocker is what we're going to do. So we slow down your heart and it just doesn't beat as hard. Well, the heart wasn't beating hard. It was beating too fast. So we come back in and I say it's a magnesium problem. They would come back and measure magnesium and say, no, it's low normal. You're okay. I would say, okay, it's not going to hurt. They're low normal. Let's bump them up to high normal. I give them magnesium and 2 weeks later, they don't have tachycardia because we basically were able to regulate the calcium channel. On the other side of that, if you come back up to calcium, calcium is interesting because you can actually have calcium low or high, and a lot of times you can manipulate calcium. The medical world, if you came into a medical world and they did your blood work and your calcium is high, you know, they'd say, well, I think you probably need to stop drinking milk. And well, actually, most of your calcium comes from vegetables. You actually get more calcium from vegetables than you do milk, more consumable. So there's more calcium in milk, but when you eat vegetables and you eat milk, what you absorb actually comes better out of the way it's formulated. You get better out of it. So people that are like, well, what am I going to do about calcium if I don't drink milk? Eat vegetables. You'll be fine. But if calcium is high in your blood or you're getting too much calcium, well, it can make the heart beat harder. You can have some issues there. Your blood pressure can go up. So most people would say, okay, let's put you on a calcium channel blocker. And that you'd come into me and I'd say, you know, if we give you vitamin D, it helps move calcium around. And if I give you K2 with that vitamin D, it takes it out of the heart and out of the arteries and puts it back in your bones. So not only are we not going to get osteoporosis, but we're not going to have this heart overacting and we can lower your blood pressure with it. So now, the electrical system. So sinus arrhythmia. When we talk about sinus arrhythmia, you'll see that sometimes written on your charts and stuff. It means normal beat, normal. So sinus is normal. Now, sinus bradycardia means that basically your heart is beating at a normal rate. It's boom, 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 boom. But when it says bradycardia, it means it's a normal beat, but slow. Boom, 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 boom. So it's beating slow. So sometimes we look at that and we're like, okay, what's going on here? Are we having a parasympathetic issue? Or are we having an electrolyte issue? And we come back and work it out. Tachycardia, normal heart rate, but basically it's too fast. Sinus arrhythmia is basically your heart will be beating a normal beat, but it's fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. A lot of individuals would get this after a stressful day. You're basically been in sympathetics all day. You're worried. You're trying to get through the day. and then you go sit down on the couch. And now your body's still confused. Am I in sympathetic or am I in parasympathetic? And this is when you sit there and all of a sudden you're feeling, and it's because it's beating fast and slow, and then you panic. And I don't know what's the matter. Well, then you get up and start walking around. I don't know if I'm having a heart attack or what. Now you go back into sympathetics again, and now you're in tachycardia, and now you're like, I don't know what's going on. So in our office, when you come in for your first exam, or even if you come in and you're having any kind of problems, if you come in and you say, I don't feel right, the very first thing we do is break out a portable EKG. And it's Cardia. It's a little credit card type thing, and I will say I've saved 5 people's lives with it so far. I've had individuals come in like, Doc, I'm not feeling good today. Okay, let's just check it out. And they're in AFib. And AFib is basically where your heart is quivering, it's not flexing right, you're in a heart attack. And sometimes it's really nice and pleasant. I can say, okay, you're having a heart attack, let's get an ambulance over. And somebody's like, no, I'm not. And I say, okay, I'm going to break all kinds of HIPAA. I'm going to call anybody you know and get them over here to talk to you and go to the hospital, And so that's what we use. I sometimes have sinus arrhythmia. I'll have a really busy day. I'll be pushing hard. And I go home and sit down and my heart's flopping around side. I use my Cardia and it says, hey, you're in sinus arrhythmia. And maybe I come back a little later, check it again, and it's fine. I know enough now. I used to panic when that happened. Then it go into tachycardia. I really thought I was dying. So then there's sick sinus syndrome. And basically, this is kind of when you're going in and out of different ones and you're flopping all around. Sometimes, or usually, that is a dehydration electrolyte issue. And so that's what it is. The AV node. So the AV node, you can get blocks in here. So you can have times where your heart gets damaged, heart attacks, or they've done surgeries and things. And I said, that has to flow down through the heart muscles. Well, sometimes it gets cut or that tissue dies, and now you have problems here. And that's a surgical fix for that, usually when you have it. And basically, they can do AV node reentrainment. Basically, that's where you're getting a bunch of little beats in there, and they come in, and they a lot of times put a pacemaker in for that. There's a Parkinson's syndrome in there, where basically your heart starts making extra signals in different ways. Usually, those are all heart damage after you've been late down the road. The one down here at the very bottom, the ectopic pacemakers. This usually happens in teenagers, a lot of times in teenage girls. And in my opinion, it's probably a situation where they were athletes, that kind of thing, and they got they got an imbalance. So they got low on calcium, they got low on magnesium, because they were doing athletics, which takes a ton of minerals. They were sweating it, plus your muscles use it. They had a period, and now they don't have enough in there, and their heart is doing their best to say, okay, fire over here, fire over here. Okay, you know what? I can't seem to fire strong enough to make the whole top of the heart contract, so I'm just going to make a new little SA node over here. I'm going to make a new little SA node over here so that we can get a little better signal. And now you get these really odd signals, and these are the girls that will be in class and often get excited about something and pass out on the floor, and they can't figure it out, and then later on they do an SA node. They do an ectopic burnout. They come in and basically burn it out. Happens in older people too, but they're almost always electrolyte deficient or mineral deficient. So once you have it, you got to go have it burned out. You can't do anything about it. But the point is, don't get one. Yeah, especially if you have grandchildren or children that are athletes. They need to be, on most young women athletes, I put them on a prenatal vitamin and I don't put them on 4 like they're pregnant. I put them on 1, so that way they have the minerals and things they need. So what are the things that can happen here? The most common issues, your tachycardia, your irregular rhythms, and then conduction blocks, which I said are basically delays in the signal from injuries. Athletes sometimes will end up with conduction blocks because their heart gets so big that basically the signal can't go through the material fast enough to make it go in time. And that's why your young athletes sometimes will be out on the basketball floor, fall over dead. If their heart got enlarged, the signal can't go fast enough from one part to the other, and so it flobbers in there and gets them killed. Common medical causes for this here, and this is medical causes. Coronary artery disease. So basically your coronary arteries get atherosclerosis, get clogged up, and that's a reason. Heart valve issues. So your heart valve is not letting the blood flow out, and so it's kind of backwashing, and your heart kind of quivers a little bit. Heart failure. Basically your muscles in your heart aren't beating hard enough. What's interesting is I couldn't find it again. I looked for it. There's a study out there that shows that people that have been on beta blockers and calcium channel blockers, which slows down your heart, are usually the ones that end up having heart failure in the future. They slow down the heart for so long that now it's not working. So probably if they would have figured out the cause of the high blood pressure, cause of the heart beating so hard, you would have never had the heart failure to begin with. And then certain medications. Certain medications, it's not uncommon to have individuals come in here that are having heart problems, blood pressure problems, tachycardia, all those kind of things. And when we run their medicines through the checklist, it basically checks for interactions. We find interactions here and we do it. And I had one a couple weeks ago that I sent a letter to their prescribing doctor saying, hey, this person is actually having bradycardia and the same medication combination caused high blood sugar. So I haven't heard back. I don't know whatever happened with that, but that was what happened there. Common functional causes. So lack of blood flow. So this can be a dehydration issue. That's actually very common for lack of blood flow. That's the number one reason for lack of blood flow there. Stress, and then electrolyte imbalances. We're looking at potassium, magnesium, calcium. I should have put sodium up there. Sodium should have been there. What things can go wrong with the muscular problems? So you can have a cardiomyopathy. So you can have a weak or enlarged heart. So I had an enlarged heart. I overused it. Other individuals don't use it enough and it gets weak. Or maybe you're born with a congenital heart problem where you just don't have muscles for your heart. Myocarditis. This is your infection, your strep infections, staph infections, things like that. They can get in your heart and they can weaken it, make it weaker, make it where it doesn't work. Heart attacks. Heart attack is 99% of the time, a heart attack is basically a lack of blood flow. It's atherosclerosis, or your blood vessels tighten down for some reason, even for a short time, or you got a clot in there. Basically, you don't get enough blood flow to it. Once in a while, you can get a tachycardia, a bradycardia that just gets in there, and the heart can't figure out what to do. It squeezes down, just locks down, and you die of a heart attack. Those are the ones that happen fast. That person is standing there talking to you, boom, just dead, and you can't bring them back. They're just gone. Common medical causes, again, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, viral infections, high blood pressure. So here, it's a medical cause. So medical cause that your high blood pressure caused your heart problems. Probably a symptom, not the cause necessarily. Although I will tell you why high blood pressure does make a little difference in a little bit. Genetic factors. So any of my patients that come in, oftentimes I will have on there, hey, send me your raw DNA data from Ancestry.com and I work it up. I basically show you what that data can do, and we look at methylation genes. When we look at genetics and you have methylation genes, you can't supply the energy to your cells that you need to, and basically what's operating the hardest in your body? Your heart. And so when we start taking care of those methylation issues, we're basically giving you years to your life when we do that. And then drugs and alcohol. And usually drugs and alcohol, they can directly affect the heart, but also they affect the liver, they affect the kidney, they affect the lungs. And so it's a common thing throughout. Functional causes. So these are the things that I'm looking for when you come in. Hey, do we have a B1 deficiency? And basically, it can cause dilated cardiomyopathy. So basically, your heart just swells up and gets big, and now you start getting congestive heart failure. This happens a lot of times to older people. You get in the nursing home, you get older, and you can't digest your vitamins as well, or the doctor says, oh no, you're on 12 medications. You don't need that vitamin. You don't need that. They take them off, and now they're having congestive heart failure because of it. And simple to take care of. Selenium. Selenium deficiency can increase your risk of cardiomyopathy. It can also cause problems with thyroid and that. But also selenium excess does almost in reverse. Your body, if you get too much selenium, says, okay, there's too much here, and it shuts off all the receptors, and now it acts like you have none. So you can go from being deficient to normal to now it doesn't work at all. So that's what you'll see all over the place for thyroid conditions. They're saying take selenium, take selenium, take selenium. If you don't test, you don't know. And so you got to be careful with selenium going the other way. And then potassium deficiency. And then the big one here, this is the first time tonight I think I've introduced this. Nitric oxide. So nitric oxide basically takes your blood vessels and it relaxes the muscles in it and opens it up where basically blood can flow through it. Your go-to signal for your blood vessels is to shut down the artery, or shut down the muscles in there and make it tight. So your go-to signal in your body is high blood pressure. Shut it down. Nitric oxide is the one thing in your body that says, open it up and let it through. It doesn't make as big a difference in your big arteries as it does those little bitty capillary beds. So remember that picture of where the little bitty blood vessels are feeding the big blood vessel? Nitric oxide opens those. So it's a big deal. You start having vision problems. You get to be 40 years old or so and you're like, oh, I'm having presbyopia. And the eye doctor says, oh, yeah, that's normal. You're what, 40 or so? And that's normal. Well, I will tell you, that's about the same exact time that nitric oxide starts to drop drastically in your body. Well, your eyes have really small blood vessels. Also, men start getting ED. And they're about 45 years old, 40 years old, and they're like, yeah, it just doesn't get there like it used to. Well, guess what? You have a ton of small blood vessels in there. Nitric oxide is the biggest player in the game right here. Women, you can't be left out. You get to be about 40 years old and you're like, well, sex just wasn't as fun as it was. It must be hormonal. Well, no, you're not getting blood flow to the clitoris, which is big on the inside. You see a little thing on the outside, it's big on the inside. You don't get blood flow to it, you're not going to enjoy it anymore. So that nitric oxide with your vision, with your eyes, then all of a sudden your hormones all start tanking out. Well, guess what? Your glands, you asked about glands earlier, your glands have these super small blood vessels around it. They're very susceptible to nitric oxide. So you get to be 40, 50, maybe 60 if you're lucky, and this really plummets. And they just say, well, that's aging. No, your nitric oxide went to pot. So low blood pressure is another problem. So blood pressure drops. The common reasons for low blood pressure problems is heart failure. Your heart may not be working right. That's a medical problem, but you should have took care of it a long time ago before you got to that point. Bradycardia. Your heart's beating slow, so maybe you're not having enough calcium in there. Maybe you're not doing some things with your electrolytes and potassium in that. Then other arrhythmias, valve problems. So that valve, when we talked about the heart and some of the roles it plays, it was controlling pressure. That valve between your atrium and your ventricle has to close off, and it needs to close off very well, because when that ventricle clamps down, if you have a valve that's pretty poor in there, it backflows. And now, it not only backflows in the heart, it backflows into the lungs, it backflows other places, so you're going to have other problems. But that heart valve, when it's not going right, you can't keep pressure up, and your heart says, okay, I don't want to hurt the lungs, so instead of hitting it hard, I'm just going to whoop and hit it a little bit. And so that's why valve problems cause a problem, because of backflow, and you can't regulate pressure anymore. And then basically pericardial tamponade, that's basically whenever your heart's not beating hard and fluid just can't get moving. So like when that ventricle closes down and pumps out blood, well, if it only pumps down, and so you'll have doctors a lot of time when you talk about congestive heart failure, they'll say, well, you only have a 25% ejection fraction. So that means 75% of your fluid in there, only 25% got ejected. So now when new blood tries to flow in, there's already blood there. The heart doesn't relax right, so it just gets weaker and weaker over time. That's what they're talking about there. And then blood loss. So you can have low blood pressure because you're losing blood all the time. So you may have a GI bleed, but usually this is a bigger issue. This is somebody who has like a really bad hemorrhoid, somebody's had an injury, somebody has an ulcer, cubitus ulcer, something like that. And then massive myocardial infarction. So basically you had a heart attack. You had one of your arteries clogged up there, your heart can't beat, and you hope for medical attention. Then you need to go to the medical doctor. You need to be in the ER.
What is considered low blood pressure?
Low blood pressure. So in my world, in fact, it's kind of interesting. I have patients that come in all the time and they say, oh, the doctor is so happy with my blood pressure. It's 100/60. And I'm thinking, boy, and you don't feel your feet and your hands, do you? No. I said, when you wake up in the morning time, you can't get out of bed, right? You got to wait for a while before you wake up and everything. Yeah. Your blood pressure is too low. So typically when we're looking at, if your blood pressure drops while you're sleeping to 110/60, not a problem. If you're walking around here and your blood pressure is running 110/60, we got a big problem, and so that's an issue. And so what we try to do is come back and do some of these things here. Well, first of all, we try to get you some water, tell you to drink more water. Then we get you your electrolytes. So we say, hey, do we need potassium? Do we need calcium? Do we need magnesium? And then, depending on what's going on, sometimes If it's looking more like a heart failure situation, we look more at the B1 vitamins, go that way. But usually we're looking for dehydration. I'm looking for iron. I'm looking for B vitamins, looking for folate, potassium, calcium, magnesium, is how we play that out to see why you have that low blood pressure. These are the things that if people would catch early, you don't end up with the other problems. So if you catch this when you're mineral deficient and stuff. Now, a word of wisdom, I guess, I assume wisdom, a word of warning would be you can take stuff the other way. So in America, we're really bad about saying if a little is good, I'm going to do a lot more. So I literally have people come in and I will look at it and they're taking magnesium in this vitamin, in this vitamin, in this vitamin, in this vitamin, this vitamin, this vitamin. And so now they're out of balance with calcium and potassium, you know? And so those things happen where I take it down and all of a sudden, like, yeah, I didn't realize I was taking all that. So that happens too. So you can't leave this lecture and say, well, I'm just going to go take all those and trip a bit. You can't do that. High pressure reasons, heart failure because basically the pressure builds up and you can't get rid of it. Valve problems again. So you can have a valve that doesn't open correctly. So we talked about not closing correctly. Doesn't open correctly. It gets hard, stenosis. You can have congenital heart defects. You can have arrhythmias. So basically the heart is beating too fast and just building up pressure. It doesn't give a chance for it to go down through the system before the next time it beats. Can cause a problem there. Kidney problems, lung problems, liver problems, all related to that. Probably the one I didn't put on here is actually lymphatic issues. So if that lymph builds up, let's say in your legs, and now I'm pumping out the next bit of fluid down there, well, when it gets down there, the fluid comes out. The red blood cells carries down the oxygen, all the nutrients down there to it, and the fluid comes out and takes the oxygen out of the cells. It takes all the nutrients out of the cells. Well, then the lymphatic system picks up all that fluid, takes back up. Well, if the lymphatic system's clogged up, now all that fluid's down there, this blood pressure is coming down, and now it can't get rid of the fluid. So all that fluid stays in that capillary, and now it builds up pressure. And so a lymphatic issue can cause blood pressure. And it's probably a big deal of what's going on right now with people. General nutritional causes of hypertension. So nitric oxide deficiency. Not having enough nitric oxide is probably one of our biggest issues right now that's underlooked. Not actually, people are not paying attention to it. And so it's
Did you say how do we receive it?
Not yet.
Oh.
Not yet. Megha here is telling you to take beets in that. So, and that's good. That gets you nitrites in your body, but it doesn't necessarily get you nitric oxide yet. So there you go. There you go. Sodium excess. So individuals that get sodium excess. Now I'm going to say this. People that don't have congestive heart failure, most people don't have a sodium excess. We have sodium on everything, and you would think, oh my gosh, we're having a problem here. But if you're Caucasian, basically, most of the time, sodium, the way your kidneys work, you flush it out pretty easy. Your body has a really good way of getting rid of sodium. If you have any African American descent, your body basically says, hey, I'm going to be out here on the safari, I'm going to be out here everywhere, and their body is genetically made, how about that, to hold on to every bit of sodium, because sodium they don't have as much sodium there. They don't have it around like we do. We actually here in the United States have a ton of sodium, and in Europe they have a ton of sodium. So basically, we can take it in all the time in everything we eat, every tuber, root tuber, everything we eat. In Africa, there's very little there. So over time, evolved to actually store every bit, so you don't sweat it out of the glands. Their kidneys hold on to it. So you African American, you give sodium to, and basically they will have blood pressure problems. But in general, Caucasians, Asians, anyone out there is not going to have the problem. So Native Americans don't tend to have the problem with it. So excessive alcohol use is going to cause you a liver problem. And when your liver, so alcohol goes into your stomach, actually goes straight over to the liver. It's actually absorbed straight to the stomach lining. It's actually one of the few things that goes straight through the stomach lining. Goes straight to the liver. The liver has to take alcohol and make it into fat. So OH group turns into fat in your liver, and that's why you get fatty liver on alcohol. Now, then, if you're not consuming sugar, you're not consuming that kind of thing, it turns it into sugar. So then you can become a diabetic because you're an alcoholic. Individuals that are eating plenty of sugar and plenty of carbs, whenever they get alcohol, it goes in the liver, becomes fat, and the body says, "You don't need more sugar. Just leave it in there." So if you drink too much alcohol, you're either going to become a diabetic or you're going to have liver disease. It's going to happen, one of those two. A little alcohol is not going to hurt you, but excess is going to cause a problem. Well, as soon as you have liver problems, that RAS system is going to take a hit. So now you're going to have high blood pressure problems. It's going to happen. Potassium deficiencies, also related to sodium issues. They go hand in hand. Obesity. So whenever we talk about obesity, every pound of fat has about a mile of capillary blood vessels in it. So if you gain a pound, you have a mile long, more little bitty thin blood vessel that when your heart has to beat, it has to go out through there and come back. So now, if I'm 20 pounds overweight, I have 20 miles of capillary blood vessels that has to pump out and go back to it. Also, your lymphatic system. One of your main jobs for your lymphatic system, we talked about the immune system side, but also your lymphatic system, it butts up against all your fat cells. And as your body calls for fat, basically the fat comes out, the triglycerides come out of your fat cells, and they go into the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system pumps it up to your heart, goes in your heart, and then basically it goes to your liver and you use it for supply. If your lymphatic system is having to deal with a whole bunch more fat cells, it can't deal with all the fluid and everything else. It has problems. So the more obese you get, the more blood vessels you have to go through, the more your lymph has a problem dealing with it. So obesity is a problem. Diets high in carbohydrates, seed oils, and trans fats, indirectly, these diets cause atherosclerosis, and this raise your blood pressure. I'm going to get to this in a little bit. When I get to the mitochondria part, that's when it's important. So immune system issues, basically, you can have inflammation which damages the blood vessels. I'll talk about that a little more in a thing. Common causes, autoimmune diseases, regular staph infections, strep infections, and then inflammatory conditions, vasculitis. So vasculitis can be usually heavy metals. It can be mycotoxins, things that are toxins built up in your body, causes inflammation. The number one cause for vasculitis is medications. So you can get swelling in your arteries and veins from that. Specific nutritional causes of immune problems, vitamin D being too low, not getting omega-3 vitamin or omega-3 fatty acids causes immune situations, and then excessive processed foods. So that was on the last slide, and it's on this slide here too. Okay, this is probably the most important part. So now you can start listening. The heart of cardiovascular disease is mitochondrial dysfunction. So the mitochondria is your powerhouse. The mitochondria basically produces all of the energy for your cell. These are mitochondria in here. So this is your little mitochondria. This is your cell cut in half. And that is what produces all your power. In arteries, in the heart muscle, there are more mitochondria than any place else in your body because your heart takes a ton of energy. Your vessels take a ton of energy. So you have to keep these little critters happy. It's very important.
The heart and which part have
the arteries. So all those little muscles in and around your arteries all have a ton of mitochondria because they take a ton of energy. So basically they produce energy that goes to your heart muscles. They also help the endothelial function. So the mitochondria in there, they are very important for nitric oxide. So I talked a little bit ago about nitric oxide being extremely important in opening up those little blood vessels. Well, mitochondria can either hold on to nitric oxide or it can let out nitric oxide. And so it actually is dependent on what's going on in the mitochondria of how well that goes. So in smooth muscles also, they are very, very abundant in there. And they're what helps it relax and helps it contract. So if we're talking about those little bitty arteries and stuff, mitochondria is what decides whether they're going to work or not. So, what happens to mitochondria? Why do we have a problem with mitochondria? First of all, most everybody I do a genetic workup on, there's probably 50 genes that deal with mitochondrial function. And almost everybody has at least 3 or 4 that are trashed out. So I'm not worried about 3 or 4 necessarily, but it's important to know, especially if you're having heart problems, having blood pressure problems, we probably need to take a look at it. So the next thing is oxidative stress, excessive reactive species. So basically, anytime you take in heavy metals, so arsenic, lead, mercury, and all that, they tend to go straight to your mitochondria. Because your mitochondria is a powerhouse, and it tries to use it as energy, because there's actually a lot of electrical current in them, and so it tries to use it for energy. Unfortunately, it's the wrong energy supply for it, so it causes some reactive species. A lot of your food preservatives come into this category. They run right in there. So a while ago, I had up seed oils, trans fats, and that kind of stuff. They're causing problems in your mitochondria. They cause it there extremely bad. Environmental toxins, such your heavy metals, your pesticides, and all that. They kind of gum up that work right there. Nutrient deficiencies. CoQ10. Some people have a genetic problem with CoQ10 and need more of it. But at the age 20, your CoQ10, ability to make CoQ10, drops drastically. And by the time you get to be about 70 years old, you make 0 CoQ10. And you have to have CoQ10 to make your ATP work. So you get to be 70 years old, we probably need to get you on CoQ10. Sometimes I overlook that, and we really probably should. The B vitamins, I will say on the B vitamins, if I haven't done your genetic workup, you probably don't really have a clue of what you need to do B vitamin wise. Once you do your genetic workup, then we have a clue on that. And then chronic inflammation causes a problem here. So like when we're talking about the immune system, when it's throwing out, doing that collateral damage and throwing out cytokines, interleukins, that kind of stuff, it's really whacking this hard. And that's kind of what we see a lot in autistic kids and stuff. We will see an interleukin 6 real high, and that's an immune inflammatory, and it is really knocking back this mitochondria. So then they don't get enough energy to nervous system and that, and they have problems there. So when you have these problems, the result is impaired mitochondria respiration and reduced ATP production. So mitochondrial dysfunction, this is the cascade continued. So those things kind of happen. And then what happens is inside the mitochondria, it's been poisoned basically. You get too much poison in it, it can't operate right. So basically, it starts leaking out some of the electricity, some of the stuff it does, and it leads to the superoxide radicals. And so these are basically oxygen stuck to things. So basically it's rust. They start to rust on the inside. That's why the metals make a difference. All the poisons make a difference. It basically is like having a truck bed and it's not painted or anything else, and you throw some salt on it, you throw everything on it, it just rusts. That's what's happening inside your mitochondria. Whenever this happens, it actually begins to cause a problem where antioxidants, rust, begin to build up. So basically oxidative stress, antioxidants, you get rust inside your mitochondria. This is where I want to point out, and I may have this later, I don't think I do. Your mitochondria, they have a preferred fuel source. And the preferred fuel source is ketones. They love to run off ketones. And so whenever, let's imagine ketones are LP gas. They're clean gas, natural gas. Let's say that sugar is basically coal, or as I'm from Missouri, our coal was full of a lot of sulfur. So whenever they would go and burn natural gas in the power plants, it's clean smoke coming out. It's easy to take care of. It's nice on everything around it. It's great. In Missouri, we burn bad coal. We burn sulfur coal, and actually they don't let us anymore. But anyway, they burn sulfur coal. It goes up out the smokestack, and it actually falls on all the cars and everything around it. It actually eats the paint off your car. If you work for the power, I used to work for the power plant. It eats the paint off your car, and even the windows on all the businesses around, after about 5 years, you can't see out the windows anymore because it eats into the windows. And so basically, sugar inside your body, when it's at a higher than normal level, so when you're in pre-diabetic and the medical doctor says, you're fine, you're fine. No, you're not. Because basically, you're causing extensive amount of waste and rust there, and your mitochondria can't help it. It can't fix the problem. And so at this point, I'll lead to what it causes a little bit. The next thing that happens is nitric oxide, then, it is supposed to be outside the mitochondria. It's supposed to be out in the vessels, basically open it up so the blood flows through. The mitochondria then basically say, I need help, I can't get rid of the toxins, Nitric oxide says, sorry, I got this. And it comes into the mitochondria and it sticks to it, and then basically your body works real hard to get it out. But unfortunately, when nitric oxide is inside that mitochondria, it's not inside those small blood vessels now. So you begin to have a really big problem with those blood vessels all go close down. So those blood vessels close down. Well, what are those blood vessels feeding? They're feeding those arteries. So all those little arteries in there have the little bitty blood vessels coming around them, and they're feeding them from the outside. You'd think they get fed from the inside, but they're not. They're getting fed from the outside. And right now, nitric oxide is not there, so we have a problem. As soon as that can't feed those arteries, after a while, they actually run out of oxygen. So that starts to break down. It starts to die. But when it starts to die, your body's like, oh crap, it's starting to die. When that dies, that is what's making that little thin layer that we call the glycocalyx, or the easy water. Now, as it starts to die, maybe it's only dying 20%, but that easy water falls off. Now, you have your endothelium exposed. It's just right there. Well, now all the red blood cells, all the immune system, everything that's going along in there are bumping into it, and they're scratching it up. So now it's being dying from the inside, it's being scratched from the outside. So I would imagine this looks a lot like a burn. You burn yourself on the stove, you burned it, it looks pretty bad. Well, then you come along and you bump it and you scrape off the surface off of it. And now you got this bloody mess going on. Well, that's what's happening here. The endothelial has been disturbed, it's been destroyed, and now your body comes along and says, we have to do something here. We have to do something. It comes in and it puts cholesterol over it. Cholesterol comes in, and cholesterol is a lot like when they're doing construction down here and they come along the street and they put up the fence and they put the tarp over top of it. That's what your cholesterol is doing. So that the red blood cells aren't coming along and bumping into it and stuff isn't leaking out of it. Your cholesterol is there to protect it. Now, then your body comes in and it tries to repair all that endothelial. It says, okay, I need to repair this in the backside. So when it comes in on the backside, it creates what's called a foam cell. The foam cell is a bunch of white blood cells, and they take and they're trying to pull the cholesterol in, trying to digest it, get out of the way. They're trying to get rid of all the dead cells. They're trying to put new cells in. Well, it swells up when it happens. Well, now you went from having a nice squishy blood vessel to one that basically now has cholesterol stuck there, and this foam cell's pushing into it. So the medical world looks at this and says, oh, look, we got cholesterol there. It must be the problem. What's actually the problem? The problem is that you're not getting blood flow to your arteries. So you can get away with a little bit because the fact is you hurt yourself all the time. You bump things, you tear up the inside of that, and it repairs it. It doesn't repair it very good. So if you're pretty hard on your body like I was for a bunch of years, pole vaulting and stuff, I have damaged my arteries and I can see it and I know it's there. But if you're not supplying that nitric oxide and you're not taking care of your mitochondria, this is happening globally throughout your body. And so this is where heart disease starts and leads you to your end, is what it does. Cholesterol, in this case, is not the problem. Cholesterol is trying to protect your life. So once you start looking at cholesterol as being the problem, you've bypassed a long way past where it started at. So yeah, we're seeing cholesterol in the 70s and 80-year-olds and going, oh my God, this cholesterol, we got to lower it down. Most studies, and I want to go on cholesterol next month, but most studies out there that are not done by pharmaceutical companies are not showing cholesterol being the problem. And so that's the thing. And so we're going to get on with mitochondrial health. So after that happens, you go down through the cascade, you get the inflammation behind it, your immune system responds, that macrophages come in, that's where you start getting the foam cells, that's where it starts swelling up, you start getting the plaque formation. This is what happens here. Cholesterol deposition, so the cholesterol builds up, then calcium comes in and actually sticks to the cholesterol to even protect you more, because basically your cholesterol and the calcium are trying to keep you from having an aneurysm. You popped a hole in the side and it's trying to keep you from having an aneurysm there. So then you get a plaque, or you can get a rupture, or you can get a clot, is what happens. And that's the downhill slide of it. So nitric oxide, NO, is vital for cardiovascular health. It relaxes the blood vessels. It lowers blood pressure. So a lot of individuals that have a blood pressure problem, we come in, we'll also start putting them on citrinox and things like that to open up blood vessels. It not only makes blood pressure regulate, but it also opens up those real small blood vessels. The nitric oxide prevents plaquing buildup, protects the arteries. It inhibits blood clots It basically maintains healthy blood flow. The majority in our body is made in our mouth. So going back to beets, you put them in and they actually have nitrites in them. So your body has to actually turn it into nitric oxide. And you do make nitric oxide in a number of places in your body, but actually your mouth is where you make most of it. The bacteria in your mouth makes most of your nitric oxide in your body. And interesting enough, the healthier somebody's oral hygiene is, what we call the healthiest, the cleaner somebody's oral hygiene is, the lower their nitric oxide is. So for a long time, I would get the nitric oxide sticks and I would spit on them and mine would be 0. And I thought, I'm taking beets, I'm taking everything in the world, and my nitric oxide levels weren't there. Now, it doesn't necessarily show what's going on down in the esophagus and that spitting on it's only showing there. So you can also see, hey, how well are your perfusion whenever I do that? How soon does your blood flow come back? Things like that. How well sex? You know, that kind of thing. Those are good game markers. How well is your vision? But if you're taking any kind of thing that kills bacteria out of your mouth, you're most likely killing the good bacteria in your mouth. So truth is, I used to make my toothpaste. I haven't been for a while, but I used to take coconut oil. I used to take turmeric and baking soda. And it actually makes just a paste that tastes like baking soda. And it cleans your mouth, but it doesn't kill out the bad bacteria. And you can add mint to that or anything, and it doesn't kill it out. The fluoride, the peroxides in those, the whitening toothpaste, probably do really bad for your heart, extremely bad for your heart. The next thing is proton pump inhibitors. So your omeprazole, your Pepcid, all those. Actually, all the studies on those have pretty well only gone out to 5 weeks. And so they sell them. People have been on them for 20 some years. Most of them are dead because they've had heart problems now. But everything shows that after about 2 weeks, your nitric oxide levels plummet drastically. And part of that is whenever you take in a proton pump inhibitor, it actually doesn't stop you from producing acid. It stops you from pumping it into the stomach. Instead, you pump it out into your arteries. It then eats up all of the nitric oxide. And so proton pump inhibitors used for over 5 weeks is detrimental to you. And so usually I try to find somebody that's having acid reflux. I try other ways to knock that back and eliminate that. But those are two of the main things that are happening with nitric oxide. I want to go back and just show you this picture again, because basically the vasa vasorum is your small blood vessels. Each one of the little cells in that has mitochondria in it. When they're not happy, you don't get blood flow here. It goes in, it breaks up that tissue, and then basically you begin to lose that glycocalyx. It falls off the inside. You start tearing up this layer right here. You basically get cholesterol to come in and close over top of that, and basically you're downhill slide from that. The vortex action. Whenever you lose this layer right here, you no longer have the vortex action. And I mentioned that your heart does part of the pumping, but that glycocalyx also is having a propulsion to it. Kind of like just the same way that nerve conducts electricity, this is conducting a pump in there. So as soon as you start losing that off places, now your heart has to work harder, plus the blood doesn't flow to other parts of your body as well. You start losing circulation and you have a problem. So the atherosclerosis is a problem, but it's not cholesterol. It's the mitochondria keeping the toxins and everything out of that. I think I get that. So four hallmarks to all disease is basically mitochondrial health. You got to get rid of the oxidative stress out there. You got to keep the blood flowing to everything. And basically, you got to cut down the inflammation and get rid of the immune response. So when you see things happen bad, this is the process that happens. Basically, you've got junk in your mitochondria, the blood flow stopped, you got inflammation, and then things just fall apart on you. The keys to health is mitochondrial support. So you want to increase the nitric oxide outside the mitochondria. That's where it belongs. That's where it does its job. You want to decrease the nitric oxide in your mitochondria, because when you do that, basically that means your mitochondria is working right. You want to increase your oxygen. So interesting enough, whenever mitochondria is functioning properly, it's sucking in oxygen like crazy, taking it in, and it's doing its job. It's just like the power plant. It takes in a lot of oxygen, it's putting out energy, and it's putting out waste. Whenever nitric oxide comes into mitochondria, oxygen can't get in. So it stops breathing, it stops producing power. So that nitric oxide being on the outside is incredibly important. You get basically power generated inside, and you get blood vessels open up outside. The second you switch that and put oxygen outside and nitric oxide inside, now everything outside begins to deteriorate very fastly. And then you want to decrease those radicals, and that's basically getting rid of the toxins in that. So natural support, reduce the toxin load. Regular exercise. So your body produces, if you get under 4,000 steps a day, your body begins to not produce nitric oxide. It almost shuts it down. Whenever you get over 5,000 steps a day, basically your body begins to produce a lot of nitric oxide. When you get to 10,000 steps a day, it's producing a significant amount of nitric oxide. The next thing, the balanced diet. So you want a balanced diet, rich in fruits and vegetables, because they actually work to clean out the mitochondria. You want to take adequate vitamin B, CoQ10, and selenium, but really you almost need to measure those, and in all honesty, to be where and that's tricky because you can't only just measure what's in the blood, because the blood, everything pulls the blood to keep you alive. There's stuff in other places, and I'll explain that here in a second. Then you want to limit what you put in your body. The processed foods, especially, I talked last month about seed oil. Was it last month about seed oil? No, last month was 2 months ago, seed oils. That's a big thing in this. Seed oils go into those mitochondria and actually destroy them really quickly. They can't process them, and basically it's like burning jet fuel in the motor. It just burns them up, is what happens. They're doing good. Actually, this kind is doing incredibly good about changing, and that's a cost to the restaurants. And in a time where food's gone up and everything else has gone up, that's actually pretty significant. Stress management. So we talked about being sympathetic. When you're in sympathetic, your body's running at high speed. The mitochondria have to work hard. If you don't go to parasympathetic to rest and digest, you don't give them a break. Adequate sleep. So when you sleep, basically your body cleans out those mitochondria. It's the opportunity for it to clean out and restore them. If you're not sleeping, you're not restoring those mitochondria. And then you want to limit the toxins, the exposure. So limit your exposure to pollutants, smoke, excessive UV rays, toothpaste, which that's still a hard one for me. I go out and buy my toothpaste. I got to do something because actually it's a huge deal. If you consider that's the one thing that's causing people problems. And then get rid of the PPI. So if you're having a problem with digestive issues and you're taking proton pump inhibitors and that, come see me. I'll figure it out for you. Nutritional support. So antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, CoQ10, spirulina, and chlorella, which are both they're both algae, and both of them are antioxidants. Very strong antioxidants. Both of them also pull out heavy metals. Laminaria is another one. They clean up pretty good, and I just take that in my morning with my supplements. And it doesn't taste good if you actually leave it in your mouth because it tastes like you're eating algae. And then all those things neutralize the superoxide radicals. Mitochondrial support, your B vitamins. This is where we do the genetic report. You basically give us your data from Ancestry.com. I see what ones that your body actually needs more of or less of, and we do it that way. L-carnitine, depending on, again, your gene report, I look at that, and some people need a lot of L-carnitine. Some people don't need much at all. That gene report tells that. Nitrate and nitrite-rich foods. So beets, there's your beets. You got to get them in, and they do make a difference. Even if you have bad bacteria in your mouth, they're going to help out. It just helps if you have better bacteria. Leafy greens, yeah. Basically, the beets and the leafy greens reduces the toxins, neutralizes the superoxides, and increases NO. Omega-3 vitamins basically take down, and they're anti-inflammatory, and they repair. So like when you're looking at the inside of that artery and it gets scratched up, if you have enough omegas in, you have a chance of repairing that. Especially if you're just, like I talked about, you get a little injury, and especially if you're young, you clean it up, and that's how you clean it up. You use the omegas to clean that up. Magnesium impacts everything in your body. Your heart arrhythmia, how the muscles relax, your blood pressure, everything. Potassium, crucial for nerve impulses and muscle contraction. Your B for methylation. Methylation is what I'm talking about when I look at your genetics. your B vitamins carry what's a carbon and 3 hydrogens to every cell in your body, and they hand it over, and your cell uses that, the mitochondria uses it to make ATP. So if you don't have B vitamins that are carrying, some of your cells need a certain B vitamin to do it, other ones need another one to do it, other ones need another one to do it. So it makes a difference of what you have going on. Water. Water is absolutely crucial, and we covered that, but I have probably more people that have high blood pressure have a water problem than they have anything else. So it's important. Vitamin D. So vitamin D, and actually I had about 6 slides on this, and I had to take them out because we're past time, sorry. Vitamin D increases nitric oxide drastically. So when you're below 50 on your vitamin D, your nitric oxide is going downhill. If you're down to 20, your blood flow is diminished, your blood pressure is up, nothing's working right. We get you vitamin D in, all of a sudden you get blood flow. Wow, I don't need my glasses right now. I don't need this. Everything starts functioning correctly. And then sodium. Unless you have a heritage of having African American problems or you have congestive heart failure, you've got to have some sodium. Now it needs to be balanced with the other minerals. You can't go out and have salted fries all the time and not get in the magnesium, potassium, and that. But it's crucial. So this is my red light therapy bed. And that's our house. And actually this picture does not do this justice. I was out rabbit hunting, and on the side windows of the house, these windows here coming out the top, it looked like a laser beam going out, and it was coming out all through it. Michael may see that from once in a while. You'll see our red light therapy. Red light therapy, the 2 wavelengths in it, there's a 3650 and there's an 800 wavelength in there. It actually takes the nitric oxide and cleans it out of the mitochondria. So that's actually why it's so significant in healing stuff and doing that. It basically shines a red light on the mitochondria. It takes the toxins out and kicks them out. It kicks out the nitric oxide. It brings in the oxygen. The toxins actually go into vesicles, which is little packets, and you excrete it out and get rid of it. And basically then you get blood flow to places you didn't have it. So people that have injuries and stuff, a lot of times they do red light therapy on it. Like, well, yeah, that helped my injury out. It really worked on it. But because it worked on the nitric oxide cycle. That's what red light therapy is doing. So, try to use it every day. I'm probably using it twice a week is what I'm doing. And so I used to use it every day for like 10 minutes. And now I use it probably 30, 40 minutes when I get in there, you know. About 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day is good. At first when I was using it with goggles on, suntan goggles on. And we went to a factory, it was too around. He's like, why would you do that? I was like, isn't it too bright for your eyes? He's like, no, it actually heals the back of the retina and stuff. And so I found I started using it without the suntan glasses on, and I don't need my reading glasses. As long as I'm using it once a week or so, I don't need my reading glasses. If I go 2 or 3 weeks without doing it, I need reading glasses. So it's a game changer. So it stimulates mitochondria. It releases that. It makes them create more ATP. It releases nitric oxide. It actually gets rid of the oxidative stress out there and basically helps you heal. So, testing. This could be a whole lecture, but what I look at when I'm testing for these things right off the bat is I look at the comprehensive metabolic panel. Hey, what's going on with your liver? What's going on with your kidney? What's going on here, chemical-wise in your body? That also has your potassium, has your chloride, has your sodium in it, and I'm taking those. And yeah, if you're really good in there, perfect. But if your sodium's low and your chloride's high, or vice versa, and your potassium's high or low, and you see that stagger in there, we have an electrolyte problem. So then we're going to run a UA on you and see what's going on with that. Do you have enough water in there? We're going to find out what's going on. A1C. So this is something I didn't mention when I was on the mitochondria. I talked about you have preferred fuel source, and preferred fuel source is ketones. Ketones are like your LP gas. The sugar is like your coal gas. Your A1C measures how high your sugar was over the last 38 to 45 days. And basically, that's a good telltale. Are you going to have mitochondrial dysfunction? If your A1C is high, you have mitochondrial dysfunction. Your vitamin D level, I said you can't produce nitric oxide if your vitamin D is too low. So that's why we want your vitamin D up. Also, if your vitamin D is not correct, your calcium is not correct. And you're going to have heart problems. Either it's going to be too hard or too soft. Methylation genes. So we do, people pay, I think right now it's $39. You pay $39 for Ancestry DNA. You get it back in and you send me a zip file, and basically I write you up a book. That book that tells you your basically profile of your genetics, the important things, and I go through and pick out the important things for you. If you went to a hospital and had that done, like the Mayo Clinic store, that's about $30 grand, and you basically get it for the $39 in an office visit is what you get. It's a game changer for longevity in your health. The next one, this is an expensive test. I don't know the price of it. I don't know. It's either like $5.99 or $6.99 or something. This test, and I was going to put it up and go through it because it's actually pretty important. This test shows your minerals, your vitamins. It shows your amino acid breakdown. It shows your oxidative stress. It shows your mitochondrial health. It shows all of your omega-3s, omega-6s, omega-9s. It shows you all those levels in there. It shows you your toxins, your arsenic, your mercury, your lead, also what your selenium is. It shows you all that stuff. And basically, it is where you at right now as far as that mitochondrial function. And it's a game changer. It's one that, in fact, we should get this back to my wife pretty soon because we had some little things that came up and I was like, oh, I think this is methylation. This is a mitochondrial issue. Let's check it out. And this is the test we're running. So probably along the way, in general health-wise, the 3 tests, if you're going to spend a lot of money and you want to, I don't want to say a lot, if you want to spend money on your health, the 3 tests that you really want to run is that FMV, a food sensitivity, and then you want to do the genetics. You do those 3 things and you know, okay, here's what my genetics say my problems are going to be. Here's what's going on with all the nutrients in my body. And then basically, here's if I have a food sensitivity. So you kind of, then you clean out that stuff out of your diet and you're doing very well. PI is a test we do when you come in here. We put your little finger in a thing. And PI is the difference between when your heart's beating and when it's not beating, how much oxygen is actually going through your vein. And so it tells us kind of, hey, if we're not getting enough oxygen through there, we're probably having a mitochondrial nitrite issue. And so that's something we do here. Heart rate variability. I don't do that here. That's what you do when you have a wristband or watch or ring, whatever that measures it. You can look up heart rate variability. You actually want that number to be as high as you can get it. You want that percentage to be as high as you can get it. You want to go up with your heart rate and you want it to come down. People that have a decreased heart rate variability are on the downhill slide, and they can actually watch you and watch it come down, and they can predict when you're going to die, how much longer you have to live based on your heart rate variability. They can say, you got 5 years, 6 years, the higher it is, the less likely you're going to fall over dead. Oxygen saturation should always be above 90, should never drop below 90. I'd say 93 actually, but 90 is a safe bet. And that's when you just put it on your finger, you check it out. It tells you, okay, do we have enough blood flow in here? Are we getting what we should in here? Are my lungs working right? We do an EKG here in the office, and it's basically the cardia, and they're like $99. If you don't have one, you ought to buy one. It'll save your life. And it doesn't, you can sign up for a membership and all that other junk. You don't need it. And basically put your thumbs on it. It measures what's going on with your EKG, and it's a lifesaver. Cheapest thing you can buy for your health, and most likely, if you keep it for a time period and you actually use it, you're going to save somebody's life with it.
What company do you
Cardia, Kardia, and it's on sale right now too. I think you can get a little strip one. I don't like it because it's kind of bulky, or you can get one that looks like a credit card, and it's $99 for the credit card when the other one's $69. And
One that's the size of a credit card is recommendable?
Yeah, it works. And you only need, it's a 3-lead, so it's going to tell you if you're having a problem. If you're having a problem on that, go to the hospital. If you're not having a problem, you're okay on that. It's medical grade, small. It's an FDA approved.
No,
So
I would think that was like a scam.
yeah, no, it works. It works very well. And like I said, I've saved at least 5 people's lives with it. And then the lipid panel. If you're already so far down the road that you're already having all these other things, then we need to take a look at the lipid panel. And what I'm actually looking for, probably more than what the other medical doctor is looking for, I'm looking at your ratio of your HDL to your cholesterol. They're looking at, oh, what's going on right here with your total cholesterol? Well, you can have your total cholesterol at 300 if your HDL is good and your LDL is in not a terrible range. You can do fine. I'm also going to say this about lipid panel. If you have somebody who's not really good at reading a lipid panel, they're going to screw it up. A lipid panel, if you come in here and you get it done and you haven't fasted for 9 hours, it's going to be off. It's 100% going to be elevated because basically you have triglycerides in there and it's taken into total account and it's going to be off. If you come in here and you fasted 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 hours, well now you start breaking down fat. your triglycerides are going to be up, your total cholesterol is going to be way up. It's going to come back maybe 300, 400 up in there. So if you have that 9 to an 11 hour fast and you're drinking water, now we could actually tell you what it is. But almost nobody tells you that. So a doctor gets it, and the first question I usually ask if I look at a lipid panel, how long were you fasting? Or I'll look at the time when it was taken. So if it says it was taken at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I can pretty well guarantee you weren't fasting from, the other day. So that one, you probably ate breakfast, you probably had lunch, something in there. If not, you fasted way too long and it's going to be way sky high. So if you don't have somebody who can read a lipid panel that way, you have problems. That's the end of this. And I'm sorry we ran long. I had it probably a whole bunch more slides that I had to take out. Maybe someday I'll do one on mitochondrial health that's just mitochondrial health. But I think in what you got here, you got probably a class on anatomy of the heart. You probably got a college course on anatomy of the heart. You probably got a college physiology course on how it functions, how it happens. And then we drop into basically a cardiology class, which you'd have in college on that. And then we went to mitochondria, which is something that a few people are talking about, but nobody really understands. And hopefully you have a really good understanding of it.